$4 billion by manipulating consumers into providing their credit card numbers, leading to what have been called mystery charges. We'll hear from two of those customers during this hearing. Jay Rockefeller of West Virginia chairs the Senate Commerce Committee. This is an hour 35 minutes.
I'll make an opening statement. Is Kay Bailey coming? Yeah. No. Can you make a statement? First Republican. Okay. Every single day, millions of American consumers sit down in front of their computers to make travel plans, to send somebody some flowers, or to order movie tickets or sundry other transactions. For many Americans, shopping online is now as routine as going to the grocery store for milk. According to a recent survey, 59% of all adult Americans have now purchased goods or services over the internet. Shopping online is, in fact, an exciting new way for people to learn about products, to compare prices, and to find a good bargain. And in tough economic times, when Americans are doing all they can to make ends meet, every nickel, every dollar counts. But when we go online to buy things, we all have a few very important expectations about how we should be treated, regardless of how and where we make a purchase. First of all, we expect the merchants that we do business with to treat us honestly, fairly, and we expect that on the internet. We expect online merchants to clearly explain their prices and their terms to us so that we know exactly what we're getting if we decide to spend our money at their websites. And when we agree to buy something from them, we expect merchants to protect our credit card and other financial information that we share with them. That's why it is so darn disturbing to me to learn through our investigation that we've done in this committee, over 300,000 pages of research, what's happening to millions of American consumers every day who are shopping on the internet, including the two consumers we have invited to testify today. What's happening is that many online merchants have decided to betray their customers' trust. For a few extra bucks in profits, these merchants pass their consumers' personal billing information on to mysterious companies with names like Affion, Virtru, Web Loyalty, companies that have a long, troubling history of misleading sales practices. From the consumer's point of view, here's how it happens. Section 1, the scam. You're shopping online and you decide to send somebody flowers or buy a plane ticket or a movie ticket or whatever, or even order a pizza. You type in your home address, you type in your email address and other information necessary to process the sale. Then at the very end of the process, you do the really important thing. You pull your wallet out, you type in your 16-digit credit card or debit card number, and you press purchase. What our committee has been investigating is what can happen to you after you have made that purchase. It's truly unbelievable. While you think that you're going through the final checkout process, and I associate this through buying books on AOL.com. I mean, there's a definite out process. It takes a number of steps. What's really going on is that some very sophisticated online businesses are tricking you into signing up for useless membership clubs. These businesses take the credit card number you typed in for your purchase, and they use it to enroll you in a bogus club with names like Reservation Rewards, Great Fun, ValueMax Shopping Service. Most consumers don't realize they've been scammed until months later when they notice that the club has been charging their credit card $10.95 a month or whatever. Why does this matter? A $10 monthly charge may not sound like a big deal to some people in this room. There are these numbers to consider. Today, as we conduct this hearing, there are more than 4 million American consumers whose credit cards are being charged by these clubs. And most of these 4 million customers don't even know that it's happening. According to a report the Commerce Committee staff presented to me about this problem, these online scams have made more than $1.4 billion through these tactics and charged more than 30 million American people. Consider these numbers for a moment. That is a lot of money and simply outrageous to me, and frankly, I think it's un-American, and I know you share my views. I suspect you share my views. What I find most outrageous about these scams are the reputable online businesses that are willing to take part in these scams. Committee staff has provided me with a list of 88 well-known online businesses that each made more than $1 million through sharing their customer credit card information with internet scammers, so they get what they want. We have printed copies of this if anybody is interested. Several of them have already withdrawn since they knew this was going on. We were going to have this hearing. They've already, US Air, Continental Airlines, et cetera, they've withdrawn from all of this, or say they're about to get rid of all of this. But we've all heard of these companies, and we've probably shopped at some of their websites. Conclusion: America is a country of businessmen and businesswomen. We all have great respect for enterprising people who have developed good products and sell them in our competitive marketplace. But we're here today because we want to highlight the very important point that tricking customers into buying goods and services they do not want is not okay. Not even close. It's not ethical, it's not right, and it's not the way business should be done in America, and it should be stopped. It will be stopped. American consumers shouldn't have to worry that their favorite websites are ripping them off during the checkout process. Checkout process is complicated. We haven't completed this investigation yet, but what I've learned about these business practices so far is very, very troubling. And to be frank with my colleagues who are here, starting with this hearing today, I'm thinking that the committee needs to start thinking about legislative steps to make sure that this process comes to a complete halt. We did it with telemarketing. We did it with phone scams. We can do it on the internet. That's the end of my statement. Senator Lemire, do you have a statement you'd like to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you for holding this important hearing. The Chairman has a great record and reputation for fighting fraud, and having this hearing today to talk about these issues is extremely important to the people of this country, as well as the people of America, the people of Florida, who I represent. We have too many hardworking Floridians who are being scammed in transactions just like that, and one of our great Floridians, Mr. Ray France, is here today, and he has fallen prey to these exact type of predatory techniques on these post-transaction marketers. People are often unaware that they have signed up for these scams. That's why they are scams. I had a chance to meet with Mr. France today, Mr. Chairman. He is an American hero. He served our country bravely in the Army as part of Airborne. In fact, he was so committed, Mr. Chairman, to be in the Airborne that when he sought to enlist, they said, no, you can't be in the Airborne, and he fought and he fought and he fought, and they said, well, you can be in the Airborne, but you have to give up your $12,000 bonus we were going to give you for joining the Army. And he said, that's okay, because I want to serve my country, and that's why I'm volunteering for the Army. He was injured in Iraq fighting for our freedom, and now he came home and is living his life as a good Floridian, and he gets scammed. But like a good Army soldier that he is, he went after these fraudsters, and he tracked them down, and he helped figure out what they were doing and why they were doing it, and you'll hear more from him today. Mr. Chairman, I call this post-transaction marketing click and scam. You go on, you're purchasing something like you described on AOL, buying a book or whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden this pop-up comes up. You think it's one of those normal sort of disclosures that no one reads. You click it to go through with your transaction, and all of a sudden you're signed up for $10 a month, like you said. And these fraudsters are out there stealing from our people. My Attorney General in Florida, Bill McCollum, is doing a great job going after these folks, and he's filed several actions and is working hard against them. But we need to do more, and you're drawing light to this problem, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it, because the people of this country need to know that through information that these scams are out there. The best prophylactic they can have against these scams is knowing about them. And then later, as you suggest, perhaps we need to increase penalties or help on the enforcement side so we can stop these fraudsters from stealing from our people. I really appreciate you having this hearing today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. Senator Dorkin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. In the last Congress, I held a couple of hearings on the issue of Internet privacy. The question is, what's happening to information that they have on virtually all of us? What sites do we visit? Where do we navigate? And I made the point then that if somebody followed you when you went to the shopping center and made notes about everywhere you went, everything you looked at, and so on, then the question in your mind would be, why are you following me, number one? And number two, who are you selling the information to about where I went and what I did? Well, the privacy issue is very important. We held 2 hearings on it, and I hope that we will get some legislation together, which I've been working on that issue. But this is another piece of this issue of the Internet, the online activities. First of all, advertising on the Internet is what supports the Internet, and the Internet is a remarkable thing. I mean, no one wants to withdraw the support that is necessary for the Internet to exist and survive. Online commerce is very important as well. That's what we're talking about, online commerce. But the question for all of this with online commerce is, who uses our credit card information, and for what purpose? When you put your credit card information in order to purchase something, as Senator Rockefeller indicated, you would always expect, especially on a reputable website, that that's not going to be shared with anybody, that that's protected. Well, we find out now by some good work by some investigators on our staff that that's not the case. The issue of post-transaction marketing, data passing, free-to-play conversions, I mean, that's all a fancy way of describing practices that are engaged in by people that ought to be ashamed of themselves, really ought to be ashamed of themselves. Websites, I guess I've been to all these websites. Fandango to buy movie tickets, I've certainly done that. Pizza Hut, Continental Airlines. And you have people go to websites that you know are reputable, and then they do this bait and switch on that website is used by somebody else that pops something up that says free, except it's just free for a bit, and then it's the monthly billing thereafter. And by the way, the reputable website shifts your financial data to the company that pops up the ad that says free and is trying to sucker you into this. I mean, that's unbelievable to me. Now, when you see things that are shameful, it seems to me that you would expect that that would stop immediately, but shame is not always an emotion that persuades people who are making a lot of money to stop. My understanding is that Affinia and some of the others that the chairman mentioned have changed some of their practices since this investigation began, and we welcome that. But there are others out there, and I think this is a really important reason to have a hearing. At the root cause here, the question is, who gets financial information and how is it used, or how is it misused? And this investigation has turned up, I think, some shoddy business practices that have to stop. And I don't think they'll stop on their own necessarily. And I think the chairman has suggested there may well need to be required some legislation here, and I appreciate that work and the work of the committee. Let me just finally quickly say I appreciate the witnesses who have been here and who are going to present testimony today. We thank you for traveling and being with us and shedding some light on these issues.
Thank you, Senator. And incidentally, the work that Web Loyalty and some of the others have pulled back a little bit is totally insufficient. I think that some of our legal scholars are going to make that very clear. Ray France, we're very proud to have you here. Linda Lindquist, you also. Florencia Marotta-Wurgler, who is an assistant professor at New York University School of Law. You too, Professor Prentice Cox, University of Minnesota Law School. You're one panel, so you're all one person. See? Professor Robert Meyer, Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, who's done a lot of work on all of this. Mr. France, let me go to you first, if I might, and sort of pull that microphone up. First of all, I'd like to thank you for, as the Senator did, for your service to our country, for your bravery, turning down that $12,000. That's...
It was actually 13.
Okay. Superhero plus. Okay. Now I think we got to defend you from some scams, and we're going to. In your testimony, you made the point that when you made a purchase on a website called entice,
Yes, sir.
you got automatically signed up in a so-called membership club called ValueMax. And then ValueMax started charging you $19.99 a month. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Let him make a statement. Is he going to testify? Make a statement.
Oh, that would seem fair. Starting with you, Mr. Francis, forget my questions and make a statement.
Oh, okay, sir.
Questions will follow.
Okay.
I do this quite frequently.
It's your show, sir.
That is true.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Chairman Rockefeller and Ranking Member Hutchison, for inviting me out to speak. I would also like to thank the center of my beautiful home state of Florida for his kind words. That was unexpected, but greatly appreciated. My name is Raymond France. I'm a former United States paratrooper and a two-time combat veteran. I fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. In Iraq, I received a traumatic brain injury when my Humvee was struck by an IED, which exploded next to my vehicle. I was awarded the Purple Heart, and now I have a service-connected disability of 100%. Early this year, I paid to use the service of an online company called entice to look up people on the internet. It's just an informational website. I had used this company in the past and was familiar with their website and their services. On this particular occasion, just like before, I got the information I was looking for, entered my billing information, and completed the transaction. The next day, the fee I paid posted in my account just as usual. About 2 or 3 months later, I was notified by my bank that my account had been overdrawn. I was unsure how this could happen since I live on a fixed income and I support myself within those means. I went to the bank to figure this out. At first, they were only able to tell me it was due to an automatic withdrawal that was active on my account at the time. Eventually, the bank was able to give me the name of the company that made these withdrawals, ValueMax. The bank manager also informed me that this had been a reoccurring transaction that I had supposedly agreed to. They were unable to give me any more information. I had no idea who this company was, and still to this day do not know what they do. I started searching the web in hopes of finding some way of contacting this company. What I found was hundreds of blogs asking the same question as I. Eventually, I found an email address for ValueMax and sent an email to which I received no reply. Later on, I found a phone number. When I called, the person who answered repeatedly asked for personal information on myself, things such as social security number and email addresses. When I was reluctant to give up this information, I was told I had reached the wrong division of the company and needed to call another branch in another state. This process repeated itself quite a few times, and through it all, I still had no answers. So I decided to write the Better Business Bureau. Quite some time passed with no reply from ValueMax. Then I received an email from the Better Business Bureau. ValueMax had told them they would refund my money, but it was my fault because I agreed to a free 4-day trial and then a $19.99 fee every month after that. According to them, I had agreed to this when I used the service of the company I mentioned earlier, being entice. In total, this all took over 8 months, and the refund took even longer. And if my account had not been overdrawn, who knows how long before I would have noticed these withdrawals. I am a disabled vet who loves this country and served her with pride. Though I may not have it as bad as some of the soldiers returning from the front lines, I do have a lot of challenges I must face due to my service-connected disabilities. But this company, ValueMax, caused me both financial and mental hardship. It took me close to a year to recover my money that I did not give them permission to take. I'm 27 years old. I use the internet constantly. I both understand it and able to utilize it with ease. I have even earned college credits in computer application. With that said, I believe it is easy to see I would not have agreed to a financial obligation I knew nothing about nor wanted. It is still unclear to me at this point how they were able to access my account. That is, unless you consider the fact that this company chooses to use deceiving methods in correlation with other companies to take advantage of online consumers. This is nothing short of theft. My country promised to take care of me when I returned home. But without laws to govern these unethical practices, instead my country is allowing me to be taken advantage of. This is a problem that must be resolved, as it is not just vets who are victims, but all Americans. If not today, then tomorrow or next week. The bottom line is, if left unchecked, these kinds of practices will spread out of control. Now that this issue has been brought to light, it is imperative that the leaders of this great country are proactive and aggressive in putting an end to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lindquist.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Lindquist, and I'm from Sussex, Wisconsin. In April of 2007, my 19-year-old daughter and I went to temporarily live in Atlanta, Georgia. My daughter had sustained a spinal cord injury in January of 2007 while downhill skiing and was a quadriplegic. She started to get movement back in her legs, and both my husband and I felt that she needed to go to a specialty spinal cord facility in order to give her the best possible opportunity for recovery. This would mean that my husband would have to care for our other 3 children solo back in Wisconsin. One of the best things about being in Atlanta was meeting and socializing with other families in the same situation. One of our favorite things to do was to go to the movie theater. In July of 2007, I started purchasing tickets from movietickets.com. I remember that at the end of the transaction, on the confirmation page was a coupon stating, "Get $10 off your next purchase." So I clicked on the coupon because it seemed that it was a legitimate offer from movietickets.com, and I thought they were a reputable website. The next page needed my personal information. I then decided that I did not have enough time to fill out that page, so I closed out of the website. Approximately 2 weeks later, again, I purchased tickets on movietickets.com. This time, however, I did start to fill out the personal information. But after going to the next page, I realized that this was probably a scam. At no time did I ever include my credit card information or knowingly agree to any terms and conditions. After 4 months of physical rehab, my daughter was beginning to make great improvements, and our stay ended up being lengthened by another year. We finally returned home in August of 2008, and finally in October of 2008, my husband was paying our bills and asked me to take a look at the credit card statement. There were 2 charges for $10 each, one from reservation rewards and one from shoppers discounts. I did not know what these charges were for, but I told my husband that I would find out. I first called the 800 number that was listed on the credit card statement under reservations rewards. I spoke with a customer service representative who told me that I had signed up for reservation rewards and shoppers discounts online after a movie ticket purchase on movietickets.com. I told the representative that I had not knowingly signed up for this service and asked how they had gotten my credit card number. She stated that movietickets.com gave them my credit card number. I then asked what service exactly I was paying for. She stated they offered coupons and discounts for restaurants and hotels. I told the representative that I had never gotten any correspondence from them either online or via mail regarding my so-called membership. I then asked her to cancel my membership and also to tell me how much money I had paid to date. She replied that I had paid $320. I was shocked. I asked if I could get a refund for my money, and since I had no idea that I had even subscribed to this service. She stated that she would cancel my membership and could credit me the last month's payment of $20. At that time, I did not think I had any other options as far as getting my money back, but the more I thought about it, the more I was upset with movietickets.com. Here was what I thought was a reputable website, when in reality they were allowing this scam at the end of the purchase. I then went on movietickets.com and sent them an email regarding the money I had lost due to them giving my credit card number to a scam. Approximately 30 days later, I had gotten a correspondence from them stating that I would be getting a full refund. I am a college-educated person who is online every day. I have made hundreds of online purchases over the last 10 years. I have seen many scams and offers on the internet and have only been lured in by one, this one, due to the fact that the scam was associated with a reputable website and required just one click. Just last week, in fact, when I purchased the airline ticket for my son to travel here to Washington, D.C. with me on AirTran Airways, what should appear on their confirmation page but a get $20 cash back offer from Great Fun. You can bet that I will be sending AirTran an email regarding my disappointment in their choice of an affiliate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Meyer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Meyer. I am the Gayford Steinberg Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where I have served on the faculty since 1990. Throughout my career, my research has focused on the study of consumer decision-making, particularly the psychological processes that lead consumers to adopt novel goods and services. In addition to my research, I have spent the past 27 years teaching the practice of marketing at the undergraduate, graduate, and executive levels in both the United States and abroad. I was invited by the committee to offer testimony on a class of post-transactional marketing methods used by firms to sell subscription memberships in third-party benefit programs online. I originally became familiar with these practices while serving as an expert in a class action suit involving a direct marketing company in 2007, and more recently while serving as an expert for the Iowa Attorney General's office. My overall opinion of these practices is threefold. First, the sales methods used by these firms do not constitute marketing, as the term is commonly understood and practiced by ethical businesses and as is taught in major schools of management. In almost all cases, the membership programs being offered to consumers hold a limited, if any, value. No attempt is made to communicate information about the programs in a way that would allow informed choices by consumers, and the firms who use these methods display little interest in building or nurturing long-term relationships with contacted customers. In contrast, the sales methods are the cornerstone of a scheme in which firms seek to earn profits by luring customers into paying for memberships and programs that they would not subscribe to given their full awareness. Second, while the substantive content of these sales practices varies, this deception is achieved through a coordinated set of communications that display a distinctive common architecture. These include the use of web designs that obscure the relationship that exists between the first and third-party sellers, offering enticements of free premiums or incentives that consumers will have little chance of ever obtaining, creating false beliefs that no financial risks are incurred by agreeing to the transaction, and by creating exit barriers that make it difficult to avoid and or recover unintended membership payments, such as by making continued membership the default option for consumers who are not fully cognizant of what they have signed up for. Third, the architecture achieves deception by exploiting a series of well-known psychological biases that are known to limit consumers' abilities to make fully informed choices in markets. The most general of these is the creation of web environments that lead consumers to make decisions using automated or unconscious processes that do not fully consider all the information that is available in a website or presented in a decision setting. Examples include site designs that create the false impression that the offer is being made by a familiar, trusted seller, designs that misdirect consumers' attention away from text that might describe the true nature of the transaction, and by exploiting tendencies to choose default or accept options when there is confusion about what the correct course of action it would be in a web session. I should also note that the lack of ethicality of these practices is inflated by the fact that they are often targeted at vulnerable populations who are ill-equipped to absorb the financial losses they impose. Specifically, the practices may be particularly effective when targeted at consumers of limited means for whom the small cash enticements promised by the programs would represent significant financial assets, and or older consumers who have limited experience navigating the web. Naive consumers with limited web experience may be taken in for no other reason than harboring beliefs that the sellers on the web follow the same norms of ethical exchange that they have come to expect in traditional markets, where payment for goods and services is a volitional choice of the consumer, not something one has to opt out of. Finally, the persistence of these sales schemes also pose a long-term risk to legitimate businesses who conduct sales in an ethical manner over the web. As these practices proliferate, the negative experience of consumers who are taken in by these schemes may serve to foster feelings of mistrust towards legitimate sellers, thus impeding the growth of a major modern channel of commerce. Thank you.
And now, Professor Marotta-Wurgler.
Yes, Chairman Rockefeller, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify on the issue of aggressive sales tactics on the Internet and their impact on American consumers. My name is Florencia Marotta-Wurgler, and I'm an associate professor at New York University School of Law. I teach courses in contract law, e-commerce, and sales, and much of my research focuses on contracting practices in electronic commerce. The key question regarding to post-transaction marketing in today's hearing is whether consumers are legitimately entering into these transactions, whether they're being effectively tricked into them. My general assessment, based on both the norms of online commerce and academic research, is that consumers may indeed need further protections from these marketing practices. My first point is that post-transaction marketing techniques violate consumer expectations. One of the well-established norms of online commerce is that sellers require consumers to complete a checkout process that includes entering their payment information whenever they want to make a purchase online. This norm allows consumers to be comfortable with online purchases and greatly facilitates e-commerce activity. Post-transaction marketing techniques interfere with these established norms. The timing of these third-party offers interrupts the standard checkout process with the original vendors, thus increasing the likelihood that consumers end up subscribing to an unwanted service without even noticing because they were prompted to enter an email address instead of payment information for the second transaction. So what I would like to highlight here is that these practices violate norms of online commerce. Consumers associate purchases with payment details and email addresses with email messages. The next question is then whether fine print explaining the nature of the transaction can substitute for this deviation from norms and provide a legitimate basis for the transaction. So my second point is that current methods of disclosure of the terms of the post-transaction marketing offers are insufficient to provide adequate notice. The basic problem with relying on disclosures in fine print is that people simply don't read it. For example, two co-authors and I have studied the extent to which people who buy software online choose to click on and read the fine print governing the use of the software. We found that only 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 shoppers chooses to read these contracts. Moreover, those who did actually click on the contract spend too little time on it to have actually read it. In a follow-up study, we found that the prominence of the disclosure did little to increase the probability that contracts would be read. In fact, consumers are unlikely to read the fine print even when sellers put the terms right in front of them and require explicit assent by checking a box immediately below the terms. And even if it were the case that consumers were inclined to read fine print, which they're not, post-transaction marketers structure and display fine print in a format that further discourages reading and comprehension. These marketers often present their offers in a format that is deceptively similar to that one used by the original selected vendor, and even include the selected vendor's brand name and logo. Consumers who are induced to believe that they're dealing with familiar vendors can easily be lulled into complacency. Our study suggests this is a genuine problem. We found that even fewer than 2 in 1,000 consumers read fine print when they were dealing with bigger, more reputable sellers. This makes sense, as consumers will feel a lessened need to read the fine print when dealing with known vendors. Post-transaction marketing firms offers exploit this trust. Another way in which these marketers discourage reading is by identifying their offers as rewards or bonuses that consumers should in fact be grateful to receive. The offers also splash relatively larger font terms around the page, such as congratulations and thank you. And studies have shown that consumers focus on only a few salient aspects of a product or service when deciding on a purchase. These bells and whistles have the effect of diverting attention from important information about fees. So just as good news is conspicuously splashed on the screen, the bad news is suspiciously hidden. The terms related to the fees and automatic transfers of payment information appear in small print in the left or bottom of the page and appear under another layer of unrelated and boldly displayed happy titles such as congratulations and great news. The relevant disclosures appear at the end of dense paragraphs. Of course, the problem with this is that research has also shown that the manner in which sellers display information affects the attention consumers pay to it. So given the way some of this fine print is written, even the rare consumer who actually does take a quick look at it could be forgiven for not understanding it. So I have a few suggestions to help remedy these problems. First, automatic transfers of payment information from known vendors to post-transaction marketers should not be allowed. Instead, consumers should be asked to enter their credit card information at each transaction. This will preserve the well-established norms of e-commerce. Second, they should be required to identify themselves prominently and differentiate themselves from the original selected vendors. Third, they should clearly and prominently explain fees and services. Finally, they should plainly explain how enrolled consumers can cancel or seek a refund. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I go to you, Professor Cox, you both talked about fine print, and the fine print is just the greatest scam of all time. I see some charts over there. Do any of those have fine print on them?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, I'd like to see, if you'll forgive me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't make this a Metropolitan Art Show. I'd just like to see it. All right, well, that's not as good as some that I've seen, but where they'll have $10 in bright blue, a big square up at the top. And then there will be like 5 more of those paragraphs, small print, which I'm not 20, but I have good eyesight. And if I had a Galileo telescope, I would not be able to read that fine print. I mean, it is absolutely impossible. In that fine print, if I'm not mistaken, is all of the damage that they're going to do to you. But of course, you don't read it because underneath, in the same bright blue that I'm thinking of, which said $10, underneath that in big print is yes. So what do? You go, $10, yes. You don't read anything in between because you said 1 out of every 1 million do it?
1 every 1,000.
1,000 do it. So anyway, I just want to make that point, and Professor Cox, go on to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For over a decade, first as an Assistant Attorney General with the Minnesota Attorney General's Office and as a law professor, I've attempted to combat and call attention to the practices examined here. Practices that drain the financial accounts of Americans without legitimate purpose cause cynicism about commerce and harm competitors who are trying to be honest. I'd like to make 3 points. First, the practices examined here are not limited to the internet. They're part of a bigger problem, a problem called pre-acquired account marketing. The essence of pre-acquired account marketing is the sale by retailers and financial institutions of special access to consumers' accounts so that third parties can charge these accounts without obtaining account numbers for consumers. It occurs through every channel of direct marketing, including direct mail, inbound telemarketing, as well as internet transactions. It involves all the nation's largest financial institutions at some point, and it continues to involve the vast majority of the nation's largest banks, credit card issuers, and mortgage companies. Interestingly, it is not something that is widespread among independent and community bankers or credit unions. It works by circumventing the shorthand methods we all use to signal consent to a transaction. We know we're done when we hand somebody our credit card, we swipe it in the machine, we read them the number over the phone, or we enter it into the internet. This problem is especially bad with those with mental impairments due to illness or other reasons, and those who do not speak English as a primary language. They are particularly victimized by the complexity of these transactions. My second point is that it's difficult to control this problem with existing deceptive practices laws and other consumer protection laws. Like it or not, they're fully disclosed, even if in a fundamentally misleading context. This causes some courts to struggle with whether the consumer should be held responsible for carefully reading the fine print, as we've gone over. I think this is like blaming the crime victim for getting pickpocketed in a street where it says beware of pickpocket on it, but the existence of disclosure does cause some confusion in the courts. This debate of law about deceptive practices is distinct from the larger and more important point. Pre-acquired account marketing, of which this is a prominent example, is a giant, insidious shorting machine, the result of which is millions of consumers have their accounts charged without their knowledge and without wanting the products they've supposedly purchased. The evidence on this point is absolutely overwhelming. And I'd like to say your staff report on this, I literally got up and cheered when I read it. It's phenomenal. It's detailed, it's thorough, and it's beautifully presented. And it's consistent with all the other information about this form of marketing and other direct marketing channels. For instance, Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan did a phone survey of people who were supposedly active paying members of membership clubs involving a direct mail solicitation with live checks involving a national agreement between a national bank and a membership club, and found literally nobody who was aware that they were a member, even though they were paying for it. Iowa Attorney General Tom Miller did a mail survey with Virtru members and found essentially the same result. And in my experience with the Minnesota Attorney General's office, prosecuting several of these cases, including one against Fleet Mortgage Company, where people's mortgage accounts were charged through both direct mail and telemarketing. And they did a survey of the consumer services representatives with Fleet Mortgage, and you got almost the same exact responses that are reported in your staff report from those consumer services representatives. Quotes such as, "This is a fraud, this is a scam, why do we allow our customers to be charged like this?" The third and final point is that unlike the often difficult and tricky consumer regulatory problems where you have to balance how exactly you intervene in the market so as not to prevent legitimate commerce, this is one of those rare cases where there is a clear and obvious solution. Prohibit retailers and financial institutions from selling access to consumers' accounts to third parties. There is no legitimate commercial reason to do this. Consumers mostly already think this is the law, and it should be the law. It is with great appreciation that to you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. It has been a very frustrating decade trying to call attention to this problem, and with one fell swoop, you've already made more impact on this than a decade worth of work by many other people who are trying to combat this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cox. You're very kind to the committee and its staff. I want to go back, Mr. France, to exactly where I was, because I think it's very important to get this stuff on the record so that we can achieve what some of you have called for. We were already at the point when you said then ValueMax started charging you $19.99 a month, and you said,
Yes, sir.
had you ever heard of ValueMax Club before it started charging you $19.99?
Never before, sir.
Did you ever authorize ValueMax to charge your credit card $19.99 a month?
In no way knowledgeable to me, sir.
Did you ever give ValueMax your credit card number or bank account number?
No, sir.
If you had been asked to type in your 16-digit credit card number to join this ValueMax Club, would you have done it?
No, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Lindquist, I'd like to ask you, and for your son, thank you for coming up today from Wisconsin, whatever. Your testimony is that you were using a website called movietickets.com. You thought that you were buying just movie tickets, but in return it turns out that you also bought memberships in two clubs called Reservation Rewards and Shopper Discounts, and both of these clubs were charging you $10 a month. Is that correct?
Yes.
Had you ever heard of the Reservation Rewards or Shoppers Discount Club before these clubs started charging you $10 a month?
No.
Did you ever authorize Reservation Rewards or shopping discharge to credit your card $10 a month?
No, not knowingly.
Did you ever give Reservation Rewards or shopping discount your credit card number or your bank account number?
No.
If you had been asked to type in your 16-digit credit card number to join the Reservation Rewards or Shoppers Discount Club, would you have done so?
No.
So, Mr. France and Ms. Lindquist, I'm very sorry that you got caught in this scam. You clearly did. You're clearly highly literate, thus taking away this thing that people can get scammed even though they don't know the internet very well. You know it very, very well, and you got scammed. One of our members, Claire McCaskill from Missouri, has to be something the administration asked her to do, but her mother got scammed, and she is absolutely in a rage about it, and so she may come tearing in here in a few minutes. But millions of other Americans have been ripped off in the same way that you two have been. It's outrageous, and we're going to find a way to stop it. Mr. France and Ms. Lindquist, one of the most disturbing things we've learned in our investigation is that hundreds of websites like entice and movietickets.com are selling their customers information to these bogus membership clubs. In fact, we've discovered that every time a customer gets tricked into joining one of these clubs, the online merchants gets what is known as a bounty. They literally put a price on the customer's head. Mr. France, how does it make you feel to learn that entice got paid a bounty for selling your credit card information to ValueMax Club?
It's hard to put that into words, sir, but
Right.
I easiest disgusted that they could even do that and enjoy it and profit off of it and believe that they're doing right or that they can even sleep. And especially if they're American companies, because if we claim that America is the greatest country in the world, then it starts with taking care of our fellow citizens and not taking advantage of them. Disgusted would have to be the best way to describe that.
And you, Ms. Lindquist?
I would have to agree. It's shocking that they can basically sell my credit card information to an unknown company. And everybody I talked to that I told I was coming here, it's happened to so many people I know, but they just maybe got charged a month or two and then found it. And maybe that's the goal of these companies, is just to charge these people $10 or $20, but multiply that by millions of people and...
Like 30 million people at different times. You're right. My time is up, and I turn to Senator Dorgan.
Ms. Lindquist, my understanding is you say that you were charged by this company and never received any product. Is that correct?
Correct.
No mailing from them? No coupons? No product of any kind?
Nothing.
Does this sound like fraud to you?
Yes.
So someone is charging you because they say you purchased something from them, except you received nothing.
Right.
And they're charging your bank account. And it just seems to me, I mean, I don't know the legal niceties, maybe one of the professors can suggest this, but it just seems to me if someone is taking money out of your checking account and giving you nothing in return, that's something beyond just shameful. There must be a legal term there. The other issue that I find really troublesome here is that reputable sites, I buy movie tickets online from time to time, and so you go to these sites because they're reputable, presumably. Reputable sites are actually being reimbursed by the companies that are scamming you. And I assume they're being reimbursed because they're able to be a writer on that company's website. I mean, that's where they get their customers. You show up at the website wanting to make a transaction, buying a ticket for a movie or an airline ticket, and that brings you to this page, and then they pop up with some sort of an ad that suggests you get something free, and then the reputable website gives that company provides that company your credit card number.
I know.
That's Mr. France and Ms. Lindquist, that's just unbelievable to me. That is so, in addition to being shameful, so dishonest. And I think Professor Cox said it right. This is a very important hearing in the sense that my hope from this hearing is that we will find ways to shut down this activity. There's no nice way of describing this. This is wholesale cheating of a lot of people, and I think it just has to stop. I had not previously, as I indicated earlier, I had not previously been even aware of the terms that are being used, but I'm aware there are a lot of charlatans out there looking for ways to cheat people to the extent that they can get by with it. And Mr. France, you indicate you have no knowledge of how someone even got your credit card information. Is that correct?
Unless worked with this company and gave them my credit card information, put a so-called bounty on me.
Mr. Cox, you worked for the Attorney General's office in Minnesota?
I did. I used to run. Senator Dorgan, Mr. Chairman. I used to run the Consumer Protection Division at the Minnesota Attorney General's office.
Well,
4.5 years ago, I left to go to the University of Minnesota Law School.
Looks like we got some consumers here that need protecting pretty badly, right? I mean, probably millions of people. But what do you make of the notion of somebody extracting money from Ms. Lindquist and Mr. Francis' accounts or adding it to their credit card without providing a product to them, without them even knowing they've purchased something? I mean, that seems to me like fraud.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dorgan, I have been astounded for 10 years that this goes on and tried every way to call attention to it that I could. The fundamental problems here are that that disclosures are made. So when you try to attack the problem, you wind up in this legal battle about the sufficiency of the disclosures. You have to really shift focus and ask exactly the question you're asking. Who in God's name agrees that we should allow a practice where everyone who winds up getting charged is unaware they're essentially everyone, maybe 1 or 2%, is essentially unaware that they're a member and they're being charged for something they don't know and they don't want. And on one other point, it partly works because you would think that the market might self-correct by the reputational hit to the e-retailers with the legitimate sites or the banks that are involved, et cetera. The problem is when the charge comes through, it comes through in the name of the membership club and all the attention is directed to the club. And so you get this problem where the market doesn't take care of it because the reputational interests aren't at stake.
Let me ask, the very reputable websites are playing ball and making money off of this scam. Maybe we ought to take a look at saying to the reputable website, you know what? You allow that sort of thing to bounce up on your web page, you've got some liability here. You better be finding out who's using your web page, and you certainly better find out who you're providing financial information on your customers to. You buy an airline ticket, Ms. Lindquist, to come out here, and if that company that you bought the airline ticket from provides your credit card to somebody else, shame on them.
Right.
They have some liability in my judgment. They may not now, but maybe we ought to find out if there ought not be some way to do that. And my time is about up, but let me ask an obvious question, Ms. Lindquist. You started by talking about your personal situation, and tell me about your daughter. Is she better as a result of your trip?
She is doing a lot better because we went to Atlanta. She can walk with crutches short distances, and she's very lucky, but she's still working. She still wants to get as far as she can.
Good for her.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorgan. These are available if anybody wants them. These are the bad guys that you're talking about, who some very big companies who you know, they like their $10 every month or their $20 every month, and the money can go up or down at the discretion of the scammer. So if you want a copy, we'll be glad to give it to you. Senator Lipniuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all the witnesses for your testimony today. I wanted to talk about some legal issues, if I could, with Professor Marotta-Wurgler and Professor Cox. I, too, had the honor to serve in the Attorney General's office down in Florida and go after unfair and deceptive trade practices with our Economic Crimes Unit. And our folks in that office now, under Bill McCollum, are going after these different vendors. But I want to ask you, and to follow up on what Senator Dorgan was saying, because it seems to me that an Attorney General could go after one of these so-called reputable companies who are enabling these scam artists to steal the information from unsuspecting consumers. So if an airline, for example, allows this company to operate on its website without proper disclosures and to unwittingly take this money from consumers on, you know, this annuity scam that happens month after month after month, couldn't an Attorney General go under FDUPTA, the Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act, or some other statute and hold these folks accountable?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Lemieux, yes, these cases are a little more difficult to prosecute under what's called UDAP authority than you would think they are. They're just extremely costly. And as you know, They don't shake a lot of money on attorney general's offices, and you have to make tough choices between going after all kinds of bad guys. But yes, and thank you. As an academic, I'll plug my article. That's one of the suggestions I make in the article, is to shift the focus away from the nature of the disclosures to the usage and the fact that nobody knows it, and to go after these other entities. But frankly, I think the hearing you're doing here is probably more effective at doing that than anything else. But the answer to your question is yes, and it should happen.
Professor?
My answer is similar to Professor Cox. I believe that going under UDAP might be more effective. Clearly, there are disclosures. The disclosures are not effective, whereas some courts might say that in order to have assent, particularly in fine print contracts and consumer transactions, assent must be, there has to be notice, and assent must be unambiguous. I'm highly suspicious that given the way the offers are presented, assent is done in an unambiguous fashion. I believe some courts would believe that assent was not meaningful and thus not valid. However, there might be other courts who might believe that the disclosure is in fact valid. That's why I think that going under UDAP might be more effective. That doesn't mean that attacking on the disclosure part has no bite. It certainly does. Just might not be that certain.
I agree with you, and if I was still in the AG's office, I would love to go after this case, because it's not just deceptive, it's unfair. And it makes no sense, Mr. Chairman, that you can be in a situation where you're buying movie tickets and someone signs you up for a product or alleged product or service that you never receive, and you get charged monthly for it. It's outrageous. It's unconscionable. And I think that the chairman is right, and then Senator Dorgan's right, is that there should be, and I want to follow up on Professor Cox's comment, you should be prohibited from selling this financial information. Businesses who are working on the internet should be no different than businesses who are working in regular commerce. And if I went to 7-Eleven to buy a cup of coffee and used my credit card, and they took my financial information and sold it to somebody else who then started charging me $10 a month, you know, that we all recognize that is outlandish and outrageous. And it's no difference if you're on the internet. And we are so now accustomed to these e-transactions. And as you said, no one reads these disclaimers. I don't read them. Nobody reads them. And they know that when they put them out there. It's one thing to give you information on these disclaimers about what you can or cannot do when you're using this product or service. It's another thing to bury deep within that you are buying a service, which probably is not even a real service or a real product. So I commend and support the comments that were made by my colleagues earlier, that there should be a prohibition in the law that prevents, unless all sorts of hoops are jumped through, all sorts of hoops which would show knowledge and consent by the consumer, that your financial information be sold to somebody else. And shame on these companies, these reputable companies, who are allowing this to occur on their websites. And I want to thank, again, Mr. France and Ms. Lindquist for coming forward and spending your time and being involved here, because you're shining light on a problem that I assume and believe are probably affecting thousands of Americans, and but for your willingness to come forward, we may not know about it. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate the staff that's done such a great job in bringing these issues forward, and thank you for all of our experts who've testified here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Senator Udall.
Thank you very much, Chairman Rockefeller, and I want in particular to thank you for doing this investigation and doing this hearing today, because I think it raises consumer awareness in such a way that really brings sunlight to this process. And as one of our witnesses said earlier, you know, you could go and do a lot of things, but a hearing like this, I think, brings it out to the public. And I'm in a way reminded of my days as State Attorney General, where we used to say, when we worked in the consumer protection context, a good business wants bad business out of business. And as Senator Lemieux just said, any legitimate business that's teaming up with these kind of scam operators, I wouldn't call them a good business anymore. The good businesses should be stepping forward. They should be distancing themselves from this kind of behavior. And they should be working with prosecutors, with state district attorneys, with attorneys general to get this done. And to get people prosecuted and to say we're going to take this very seriously. I have a case in New Mexico that I believe Professor Meyer has highlighted, and this is here you have a Santa Fe woman who was bilked out of $700 after multiple visits to Vista Prints websites to purchase materials for a real estate business. You described it in your written testimony that the confusing charges appeared on her credit card long after the original online purchases. And she didn't have a clue what was going on. And it goes to Professor Cox, I think what you were saying is the sufficiency of these disclosures. And what I want to ask any of the witnesses here, you know, we ought to be putting people that do this in jail. These are the same kinds of operators that we put in jail in New Mexico doing telemarketing fraud. And I would ask the witnesses that have the expertise here to tell me, you know, should the Federal Trade Commission update its existing rules for telemarketing and mail order sales to address these new online scams, or does the agency lack authority? I mean, how do we get it so that state prosecutors, attorneys general, others can focus on this area and make sure that the bad guys are being brought to justice? You can all jump in, but just don't do it at once.
Looking at me, but I'm a little embarrassed. I've been talking too much. But I will add one little thing, which at 18, I was the youngest member of the Udall for President National Campaign staff.
Well, thank you for that. He was also a prosecutor in his old days.
Yes, he was, and a nice gentleman. Just real quickly, the problem with the FTC and the problem with the civil enforcement problem here is that this thing is, to use technical language, rotten at its core. It's not a matter of separating out the good parties from the bad parties, which it usually is in a civil enforcement context. This type of practice just shouldn't be allowed. It inevitably, I've never seen it ever in any of its many modalities, ever do anything but result in millions of charges, overwhelming 98, 99% of people being charged for things they don't know. So I think the problem is regulatory. Real quickly on the Federal Trade Commission, many of these, in fact, I'm not sure what the percentages are these days. It used to be, it's primarily run through banks, and of course the Federal Trade Commission has limited jurisdiction there. So it's going to be a difficult problem to sort out exactly where the regulatory needs to happen in order to control fundamentally this problem of selling access to consumer accounts by retailers and financial institutions.
Do either of you?
Yeah, my view of it is that sort of the web introduces sort of basically opens the door to a wide array of exploiting people's frailties and vulnerabilities in processing information. And I think a lot of existing legislation was sort of designed for a previous world, and in some sense it significantly needs to be updated. And I agree with Professor Cox that the structure of these businesses is such that the only way these companies make money is through open, outright deception. And the one thing I've noticed is that they're incredibly good psychologists, and and you basically get them to cut back on one area, and they find incredibly ingenious ways of getting people to lure people into these programs through some other different ways. And they're constantly doing online experiments, and essentially if they find out that people catch on, then they say that's a bad one. We're going to keep doing these experiments until we find one that works.
Yeah, well, the folks ought to know that Chairman Rockefeller and AGs and district attorneys are going to focus on them and bring this out into the sunlight and bring these people to justice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for focusing the Commerce Committee on this issue. I mean, this is a very important issue to consumers, and I think you've done the American people a big favor in focusing on consumer protection in a new way that I don't think's been done in the Commerce Committee in a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Udall, very much. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. So was it you, Professor Cox, that was on the UDOL for President Committee?
Yes, I'm ashamed to admit.
Well, I was distracting. I was distracting Senator Udall because I was trying to figure out if you then jumped ship on Humphrey or Mondale during that time, but it appears that you did not.
Well, actually, I will say I did get out the vote in Illinois for Jimmy Carter that year.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, very poorly, you might add. It actually got notices of how bad the get out the vote was in Illinois that year.
Well, all right. Well, I wanted to welcome you, Professor Cox, and for the purpose of the record, Professor Cox has been very active in a number of very important consumer issues and has helped me on some of the work we're doing with cell phones, which has now emerged again this week with the early termination fees charged by Verizon and other things. So I want to thank you for that. And I know, were you working with, it was Mike Hatch, the Attorney General, did you file suit on similar things like this before?
Senator Klobuchar, yes. I filed suit against MemberWorks, which was the predecessor to Virtru, against U.S. Bancorp, against, there was about 5 suits filed, including Fleet Mortgage Company and several. We tried to do exactly what you're saying, which is go up the chain and try to hold people responsible at the financial institution level. And we had some success, but then this whole thing just sort of died away, and this is just, I'm giddy.
So do you think
that you're taking a look at this huge problem?
Do you think that there's things that we can do? I mean, what would you suggest that we do, the easiest thing to make the current laws and regulations sufficient to curb the abuses online?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. This really, again, has an actual easy solution, which rarely is the case when you confront these problems. Financial institutions and retailers shouldn't sell account numbers and access to accounts to third-party sellers, period. There's just no reason to allow, there's no legitimate commercial reason to allow that. And I think in my testimony, as well as a longer article, I explained some of the attempted justifications and why they're just almost pitiful. There's really not much of an argument here. Now, you get into a more tricky legislative problem when you get the problem of sellers retaining account information and then later reusing it. And there are
for their own purposes you're talking about.
Right. For instance, you might, let a website that you order contact lenses from every quarter retain your information and then just regularly bill you with that information. But then that information also can be misused in ways that mimic this problem. So I think you can attack that problem, but that's a little trickier legislative drafting issue. I really do think that there is an obvious and clear solution to this, and it's just to shut down selling access to consumers' accounts.
And have there been any attempt by online retailers to try to stop this, to try to, exert pressure on this, or you think it's just because they're giving access, so why would they do anything?
Well, the online retailers are actually the ones that are profiting from selling this. I will say that if you look at Section 502 of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and Title V, the privacy provisions that were enacted, Section 502D has something that pretty much on its face says you can't do the financial institutions anyway, which is a big part of this problem, can't do that. They can't make those sales. But the OCC led, and along with other federal banking regulators, were authorized to enact regulations, and they instituted regulations that essentially completely circumvented what I thought was the intent of that legislation and allowed the access to consumers' accounts as long as the actual sharing of the information was just encrypted. But then the membership club says, yes, they consented, and then they just decrypt the number. So it didn't effectively do anything, even though on its face it seems to really solve the problem.
And so what do you think? I mean, the evidence also shows of these people, or maybe you know this, the people that get sucked into one of these, do most of them eventually cancel them?
You can sort out into certain subgroups, exactly, great question, Senator Klobuchar. You can sort out into subgroups who the people are. Mm-hmm. Some people will cancel during the 30-day trial period, but what's interesting in a very large database sample, which is consistent with some of the information your staff report pulls forth, shows that in fact most people who wind up getting this catch it after it's initially billed, not during the 30-day period, which is totally counterindicated if you thought that it really worked the way they said it did. And then so most people catch it in like the 60 and 90-day time frame. A lot of people, some people don't catch it, and particularly when it's billed annually, they will sometimes be billed 3, 4, 5 years. So when I would talk to consumers who had this problem, mm-hmm. If it looked like an annual bill, I'd say, go back and look at your bill your credit card or bank statement or mortgage account for the year before and the year before and the year before and find out how long this has happened to you. And they live, and these companies in part live on these customers who pay full revenue and then are automatically renewed.
Right. I've gotten into some of these situations.
Okay.
Those kinds of customers. Then I go back and look at the Visa bill and try to fix it. So, but still, then eventually do most people cancel it?
Of course, because essentially nobody really wants
Right,
this.
they don't want it.
I mean, when you boil it all down at the end of the day, I don't think it's not a partisan issue, an ideology. I just can't imagine why anyone, and I'm so glad to see that it's not that way, anyone would say we want people to sell products where the people being charged have no idea they're being charged for it and don't want it. It's just absurd.
I might
Professor Meyer, and then I'm out of time here, so.
Okay.
Well, if you want to add.
Oh, okay. No, I just might add that they also, in terms of those monthly charges, that for people that actually don't cancel, essentially every year they increase the charge by a couple dollars. So essentially, they keep increasing the charge until finally you do catch it. So, and like Professor Cox said, it's could be 3-5 years before some people find out.
Wow.
So there's an art form to seeing how far you can raise it without getting people too suspicious. Senator Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. France, I'm sorry you had to go through what you went through just to get back your money, not even to speak of all of the trauma and time and so forth that you had to go through. So,
Thank you, sir.
but you are an example of what's happening with this explosion of technology. We have people that are now, instead of using a crowbar to steal, now use technological improvements, and they're doing the same thing. And they're doing it with a lot of deception, as the chairman's hearing has pointed out. And this committee has been handling a lot of other things, called phishing with a PH, and farming with a PH, and spoofing, which is another one. We just had it in Florida, a spoofing case. That's when you look on your cell phone and you see the number that's calling you. Well, if you alter that number to make it appear like you're looking, and what happened to this lady, a single woman, and suddenly she's getting a call from her own residence. And of course, somebody was doing this to play a prank on her. Well, the lady's absolutely petrified. She thinks somebody's in her house. Or one of the worst ones is that they call 911 masquerading at a certain number, home, that there's a burglary going on. 911 dispatches the SWAT team, and you can imagine what mayhem might happen on an unsuspecting household with the police suddenly breaking in. This is what technology has gotten us to, and this is what we've got to change. So, thank you for sharing your story with us, Mr. France.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And we're going to try to do something about it, and thanks to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, very much. And I would point out again that this is not just a few people we're talking about at any given point. I think the fact is that there's about 4 million people who are being scammed, and we have comments here from people in 2003, 2002. Over the years, we're talking about tens and tens of millions of people. So the amount may be small, but the amount is not small to those who are struggling to get by. And you made, Ms. Lindquist, that point very, very well, as did you, Mr. France. I mean, $10, $19.95 can put you in bankruptcy. You can have people all over you. Can, add to whatever other traumas are already taking place in your life. Question for our experts. There are thousands and thousands of businesses out there on the internet trying to sell us their goods and services. They have to convince us that their product is good if they want us to purchase from them and stay with them and to be seen from our point of view as a trustworthy company. And then only after they've convinced us that their product is trustworthy, they are trustworthy, and their product is worth it, do we then pull out our credit cards and enter the 16 digits to complete the purchase. In fact, according to Visa's, new to me, rules for merchants, to complete a valid online purchase, customers must type in their billing information, their 16-digit full credit card number, and their digit security code called CVV2. So here's my question to any of the three of you. If anybody else can charge credit cards only after consumers have entered their full credit card information, how is it possible that those companies, Affinion, Virtue, Web Loyalty, et cetera, can charge millions of shoppers who have never given them their credit card numbers?
They can't, and they shouldn't. Their argument is that that the selected vendors disclose the demand authorization of this by the consumers and by disclosing this in their privacy policy. If you go to the privacy policy, which nobody reads, by the way, of Fandango or other businesses, they actually say we're protecting all sorts of information, but you're also giving us the authorization to transfer your payment or personally identifiable information to some selected partners. So the authorization stems from this type of contract, which is, I should mention, unenforceable because the assent is not unambiguous enough. So clearly, it would seem to me that there's no reasonable way in which this would be an enforceable, a legal way of transferring payment information without the consumer ever entering the numbers, his or herself. Of course, it has been, but theoretically, I don't think it should be.
I think from the other kind of related part of that is that how is it that consumers suddenly find themselves having sort of agreed to the transfer of this information? And I think sort of the answer there is that in many circumstances, consumers are making these decisions using very, very quickly sort of automated processes that they're not really aware of. And in many cases, they think they're still in the original site. They think in many cases what they're being part of is the original purchase process of the original site. I should say that for Mr. France, I actually was taken in by the Intellius site as well. And what happened there was you go to the site and you think you're getting some information, and there's a little part where you have to, I think in my case, I had to pay like $1 on a credit card to be able to get some information, and then you click a red button that says, give me my information, and you click it, and what happens next is that you're not given the information, but suddenly you're at a new page, and you're wondering, well, where's my information? And then you're looking around for a button to click to get the information, and there's a red button at the bottom that says, show my report, and you click on the report, and as soon as you've done that, you've become a member of this program, and it would be the thing where there's just, you would have no awareness whatsoever as to what you had agreed to do.
You said, Professor Cox, in your testimony that this membership club industry, quote, would cease to exist almost overnight if it had to sell its products like every other retailer. Can you explain that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If nobody is aware that they're actually, quote, buying your product, that rather suggests that, you're going to have a problem actually selling your product if you have to convince people to pay you the money that you're demanding for the service. After 10 years of observing this, I have no question that if they had to sell this in a legitimate way, that these companies would not exist.
My time is out. Before I go to Senator Lemieux, one of the things I regret about this hearing actually is the lack of focus on the evilness and lethality of fine print, of small print. That if you can put something in small print and I mean, it's like you take a prescription out of a brown paper bag and you take the little bottle out, and then there's this paper which you immediately throw in because you can't read it. Or you'd have to set aside an evening to read it. I mean, it's so phony. And yet it's a flat-out practice that we allow to continue. Senator Lemieux.
Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. I just have one final question for our experts, and that is there anything that we did not talk about today that you would offer as suggestions to how best combat this fraud? And we can start with Professor Meyer and go down, and then maybe we'll finish up with our citizen consumers and see if there's anything else they think of which would be a good way to prevent this fraud from happening to other unsuspecting Americans.
Sure. Well, some of these sort of had been mentioned before, one of which is I think that it's really important that if you have a handoff from one site to the next, that the consumer really needs to know that they're no longer dealing with the original merchant that they have. As an example, I have this figure over here on the right. This was a case where a customer was at a Vistaprint site buying online labels, and this is sort of the site they're immediately taken to, and throughout the site, there's all these references to the fact that it's Vistaprint, and it's Vistaprint thanking you, and Vistaprint everywhere. And only if it's the case that you look at the very tiny fine print at the very bottom do you find out that this is actually a site maintained by, it has nothing to do with Vistaprint, it has nothing to do with any other, the merchants that happen to be named there. And I think that one of the reasons why this happens is customers are lured into not thinking very carefully and making the decisions very quickly, but whatever you could do to suddenly sharpen their antennas and say, hey, you're no longer in a safe zone, you've now you're in an area where now you have to be wary, start looking at the fine print, then I think that would be one small step. And
they're trading off the credible brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no reason when you look at this to think that there'd be any reason for trust, that you couldn't totally trust their whatever offers they're providing.
I guess what I'd like to highlight is the importance of preserving online norms. The reason why people don't have to delve into the fine print is because they know that with a certain steps, there are expected consequences, particularly for financial liability. If you enter your credit card information, you expect to be liable for something. If you enter an email information, you expect to get an email. So that's extremely important. Otherwise, these trust in online markets will be seriously damaged, and people might be reluctant to enter online transactions. The second point I'd like to make is that disclosures in the form of fine print are terribly ineffective at alerting consumers. Much of our current law focuses on the idea of disclosure, that as long as you disclose things in fine print, it's fine because consumers know what they're getting into, and so they're actually assenting to the transaction that's being described in the fine print. Research after research, studies after studies have shown that this is not the case. This is not the way consumers behave. So I'd like to highlight the importance that disclosure is really not that effective into duping consumers into these types of transactions.
Senator Lemieux, I'd just like to thank you because I always try to teach my students the value of the anything else question, but I think I've been heard today.
Mr. France, anything else that you think that we need to be aware of that might be helpful in preventing this fraud from happening in the future?
I think one of the biggest steps that could be done is, like had been mentioned earlier, is to actually hold these reputable or at one time reputable companies responsible for allowing these other sites to come in and do that. And essentially they're one and the same. They may not be taking as much money, but by allowing these other companies to come in, they're just as guilty. And if we can discourage them from allowing these companies in, then I think that we'll see a lot less of this problem in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Lindquist?
I agree with Mr. France that the companies, the reputable websites, they need to be held more responsible about who they're affiliated with.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I think we've gotten some good direction from our witnesses today, and thank you again for holding this hearing.
I agree with you, Senator Lemieux, and thank you. Before, we're going to have a vote on a very good judge who's turned out to be controversial but isn't, and in about 10 minutes, so we need to close. I want to ask one question and put something in the record. I ask unanimous and give consent to place several items in the record of today's hearing. One is a copy of the Commerce Committee staff report called Aggressive Sales Tactics on the Internet, which was circulated to members yesterday afternoon. The prepared statement of Robert McKenna, the Attorney General of Washington, the prepared statement of Professor Benjamin Edelman of the Harvard Business School, a letter and other materials sent to the committee by Richard Fernandez, the CEO of Web Loyalty, and statements by members of the committee who wanted to be here but were unable to be here because, as usual, there's many, many hearings going on. Final question from our experts. I guess you, Professor Marotta-Wurgler. Affinion and Virtue and Web Loyalty have recently announced their reincarnation. And they've decided to pull back a little bit. It's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, it's just like, you know, I get a letter from the CEO of U.S. Airways Group, Inc., saying they're not going to do this anymore. We haven't even had the hearing. And I got it yesterday. And then Continental Airlines is going to check in and probably pull out of the whole thing. I mean, it just shows how fragile this whole situation is and how devastating it is and how easy it is to make it devastating. So Affinion, Virtue, Web Loyalty sort of pulled back a little bit. And what they're now going to require of their customers, consumers, is to enter the last 4 digits of their credit card for proof of acceptance of their offer. Now, Virtue announced this move just yesterday, and Affinion announced their move on Friday of last week. Professor Marotta-Wurgler, I understand you recently enrolled in one of these programs after you purchased movie tickets from Fandango. Did they ask for your last 4 digits of your credit card as proof of enrollment?
Yes, Chairman, I did on Friday night. I thought it would be a good experience before the hearing to actually enroll in this. I was actually concerned about whether the emails disclosed, the confirmatory emails disclosed anything. And yes, I did purchase a movie ticket to see where the Wild Things Are, which I didn't go to. And I received a pop-up telling me to, with $10 everywhere, to please claim my reward. And requested that I enter my email address and the last 4 digits of my credit card number. I was too lazy to pick up my credit card from my wallet, which was far away from the chair where I was sitting in. So what I did, given that I was at the website of Fandango, I went to my account, and it gives where I saw my billing information. And of course, there were little stars crossed out on my credit card number, except for the last 4 digits, which I just copied and pasted onto the onto the box that requested it, and I clicked I agree. I don't think this is enough notice. It's clearly a little bit better, clearly not enough notice for 2 main reasons. Yeah. One is these offers appear to come from the original vendor. So it seems when one's dealing with an original vendor and given practices not only online but also offline, one associates giving the last 4 digits of a credit card number as a way of verifying your identity, not as a way of paying. So you call your credit card company, they want to know who you are, and they ask you for the last 4 digits of your credit card number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. So inserting my last 4 digits of my credit card number didn't require any extra effort. It didn't really require that much more attention because I thought that Fandango was the one offering me my $10 for being a loyal customer. And that they were just trying to see that I was the person who was claiming to be. Because now they have a little legend that says, limit 1 per person, you know, just in case people are flooding into these types of services. So yes, they give you on one side, but they take away on the other. So I don't believe these are enough. They're clearly better than the default, but they're certainly not enough.
I agree, and I thank you for that. The great news that Senator McCaskill is on her way over here at about 127 miles per hour, and she wants to get in 1 round of questions before the vote, and so I'll defer to her the moment she steps in. Just from my point, just a few closing thoughts. I mean, this investigation, I think, starts and ends with the American consumer. As you know, everybody's taking advantage of everything they can. The buck is never, is always a temptation, and when it comes up, like in telemarketing, we stop it, and when it comes up here, we got to stop it. And you can argue whether it should be the FTC or legislation, whatever, but the point is we have to stop it. We have to stop it from happening ever again and expose it for those who continue to do it. My message to consumers, I guess, would be very careful. Make sure your glasses are good so you can read fine print, but you probably will never get there on that. And that's a subject that really makes me very, very angry, the use of fine print to deceive Americans at all levels and many subjects which we had not even covered at this hearing. The use of small print to hide pharmaceutical secrets, you know, does this mix with that, et cetera? Well, it's in the fine print. Well, you should have read the fine print. And that infuriates me. So I think this is a huge problem. It's a Main Street problem. It's an American problem. It's sort of classic greed. And the sad part is that, you know, these big companies, they're getting, you know, $10 a month or $19.95 a month. And actually, these web loyalties, they can raise it to whatever they want. There's nothing stopping them, right? So they can raise it to whatever they want. And as I indicated, they get to try to figure out what the very point is, where Ms. Lindquist goes bananas because she suddenly realizes she's really being had, and then she closes down. So that fine art, beware if you're a consumer. I worry about this, frankly, because the holiday shopping season is just beginning. And all over this country, people who are in economic distress will be spending what few dollars they have on holiday shopping because they have children and grandchildren, and that's what parents and grandparents tend to do. And that brings me to my second thought, and that is my message for the companies that profit from tricking consumers into joining their clubs, yet say over and over again that what they do is legal and they operate within the law. I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I think. Just because you say what you do is legal, it doesn't make it right. And Professor Cox, I'd like you to finish my sentence.
Amen.
All right. We're waiting now on Senator McCaskill. Believe me, it's worth the wait. If we did this to telemarketers and stopped them cold, what's the big problem?
Mr. Chairman, I don't actually agree with that we stopped telemarketers cold, but one of the things we did, and I was intimately involved in the telemarketing sales rule promulgation, but the original rule was exactly what we're talking about. You just can't sell billing information and can't give it to a third party. And then somewhere in the process between the proposed rule and the final rule, we wound up with this very complex process that involved this concept of free-to-pay conversions. So actually companies started to circumvent all of that by just charging $1. Instead of saying it's free, they say it's $1 to get your $10 coupon or whatever. So there actually is still problems, particularly with inbound telemarketing, where you just call your customer service representative at the bank, and then when they're done talking to you, they say, oh, by the way, would you like to do this? An example of that would be Ticketmaster. You call Ticketmaster, and when they're done, depending on the kind of tickets you called in for, they'll say, were you interested in a free trial offer in this? I'm not sure that the telemarketing sales rule completely solved that problem. In fact, I'm almost sure it didn't. I think it raised the stakes just a little bit, and that made it enough so that companies shifted most of their resources over to direct mail and internet. But the problem is if you push those down, maybe this becomes more attractive, and I don't think we've completely solved that problem.
You know, granted, I'm waiting for Senator McCaskill, but the internet is very interesting to me because it was discovered by DARPA and is the source of almost everything that everybody does. I don't go on AOL.com, I go on Amazon.com, but for books. And then yet under President George Bush and under President Barack Obama, there are two directors of national intelligence who are the most powerful people in their two administrations' respective intelligence worlds, have both said that the #1 national security threat is not North Korea, is not China, is not Iran. It is cybersecurity. And that is the use of the internet from any place in the world, undetectable for the most part, to shut down already portions of Brazilian cities. They've already done a lot of damage to the Pentagon, to a variety of downloading endless amounts of information from secret U.S. government sources. So the internet is our friend, and the internet is our enemy, and the most dangerous thing that confronts us in terms of surviving. They can shut down a grid. They can shut down hospital systems. I mean, it's a very tricky business to me, the internet. If somebody can't tell me that Senator McCaskill is about here, I'm going to close the hearing.
She says she's on her way. She's in transit.
No, I'm sorry, I can't wait. If you want to, she'll pop in here, and she'll be worth it, because she's terrific. And she's a, prosecutor, attorney general, all this kind of stuff. And she's just wonderful and aggrieved on this subject. I want to thank you all very, very much for taking the time. I think I agree with you, Professor Cox, that this hearing will have an effect. It already has. And it may be $10 or $20 a month, but it's a wrongful $10 or $20, and that's not fair to do that to the American people under any circumstances, and we have to stop it. Having said that, this hearing is adjourned.